Craft spirit pioneer Roger Jorgensen joins us on the show today. Roger is well known in the craft distilling circles in South Africa. He managed to get the first craft distilling license in 1994 and has played an integral part both as a producer and as a consultant in the industry since then. Roger is now based in Kenya, where he produces the award-winning Procera gin. My name is Holger Meier and this is DrinksWorld. Welcome to the show, and today I've got Roger Jorgensen with us. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Holger. Good to see you and hear you again.
Yeah, we first met in 2011, and I was trying to work through when everything started in your life. It was way before that. You got your first distilling license in the early 90s when I just started in the liquor industry, 1994. That's when I got my first job as a beer salesman.
Yeah, well, 1994, I remember it well. We were a small band of independent sort of maverick producers who wanted to break into the big boys territory because in those days, although South Africa was enjoying its first elections and independence, if you like, from apartheid, big business, particularly in the booze sector, was completely dominated by the big boys, Stellenbosch Farmers, KWV, Distill, and so on. And private distillation licenses were virtually unheard of. I mean, the history of that is that back in the day, I'm talking 100, 150 years ago, many private wine farmers had a little copper pot still with which they made, various versions and qualities of brandy, potstill brandewijn.
Yeah.
Some of it for medicinal use, but some of it obviously for drinking. And then in the 1960s, the authorities unilaterally revoked all those private distilling permits. And so from the 60s to the 90s, the big business was able to consolidate and completely dominate the distilling industry in South Africa. So in 1994, birth of a new era, myself and Sydney Back and Akim van Arnhem from Clos Cabriere, we applied for distilling licenses and we were met with a brick wall. We had to batter it down, and it took a while. And in the end, we got hold of the Burger magazine, and they did an article on it. And eventually, in January 1994, our licenses came through. But since then, we haven't looked back. And South African pot still brandies have had a new lease of life, producing beautiful stuff. Yeah.
Roger, let's just take a step back. You were born in the UK. When did you come to South Africa?
Yeah, I was born and bred, schooled in the UK, and started my farming career there, including grapes and beer brewing and all that kind of that sort of stuff. But eventually, I got the urge to make wine commercially, and so the move to South Africa, where I could obviously be understood in English and beautiful wine farms and great wines, I made the move to escape from England in 1986 and set up a wine farm in a beautiful Boervlei Valley of Wellington. And really, I farmed and made wine in the Wellington area there from 1986, 87, 88. I produced my first wines, and stayed in Wellington right through to about 2017.
When I came to visit you, what impressed me the most was your bitters. Can you remember those?
Yeah, I remember them well. I still have the recipes, and I'm itching to get back to make more of them. Yeah, aromatic bitters. I mean, everyone knows Angostura and making a pink gin and adding a dash to other cocktails. But, bitters have become more interesting since then, and I made a range of bitters to complement the different types of gin I was making and vodkas that I was making. So I had a hop and grapefruit, and I had a chipotle chili, smoked chili bitters. I had an orange bitters that was incredibly popular, particularly for the Louisiana style, Florida style cocktail scene. Orange bitters was hugely popular. I made others as well, but you can get very wacky and esoteric with bitters. In the end, you've got to settle on a range of a few. And so I had about four different bitters, and they were hugely popular until I moved off that farm in Wellington and wasn't actually a producer anymore.
Roger, the early days you started making brandy, and tell us a little bit about the brandy and then the progress into the other spirits.
Yeah, well, the brandy thing was super interesting. I mean, I expect everyone would understand when you say if you've got a wine farm and you want to make brandy, you're diverting wine away from table wine bottling processes, and you're devoting it to distillation. Now, to do that, you've got to obviously have the equipment, but you've got to plug the gap in your cash flow because you're diverting wine from the bottle to the still, and then you've got to age it. And, good brandy, as you know, is within reason. The older it gets, the better it tastes and the more value it has. But then you're faced with the decision when you're asked the question, what's all this going to cost? What about school fees and wages and oak barrels and equipment and all this kind of thing? When's it ever going to pay back? And I made the sort of family decision then that it would become like my pension plan. As you get older, so does the brandy, and as I get older, I hope I get wiser, and as the brandy gets older, it gets better. So, that was I made the brand was originally called Claridge Potstill Brandy, but then I had another sort of eureka moment, and I thought, hang on, Claridge, Potstill Brandy, Potkittel Brandewijn. They're very sort of ugly and unmarketable words. So I dreamed up one evening and coined the word Savingnac.
Yes.
The knacky bit at the end is reminiscent or alludes to a cognac in terms of style and quality, and SA at the beginning, South African, and VIN in the middle, obviously vine or product of the vine, Savingnac.
Oh, brilliant.
And so Savingnac was born, and there was even a move in the around 2010 to have the whole of the South African pot still brandy adopt Savingnac as the generic for a pot still brandy. Like you'd have Savingnac de l'Omarin or de la Motte or de Versailles. But, those days the industry was virtually run by SALBA, South African Liquor Brands Association, and their decisions kind of informed the legislation, and they kind of squashed it, which I think is foolish, but there we are. I still own the brand and still own 20 odd barrels of beautiful stuff.
In your pension fund.
And my pension fund, absolutely. I can probably fairly safely say that a beautifully packaged bottle of Savingnac these days would trickle around the market around the 2,000 rand a bottle mark, maybe more. And at that price point and that quality, you're not going to be on every back bar, but you're going to please true lovers of fine brandy.
Yeah.
But then you've got the equipment to distill, you've got the premises. I had another sort of eureka moment when I thought, hang on, I'm sitting here every year waiting for the wine harvest to divert wine to distill Savingnac. The rest of the year, the equipment is kind of sitting idle. Why can't we make other distilled spirits? And so I sort of looked at the sort of map of spirits in South Africa and thought the obvious one to go for is gin and maybe pot still vodka, which I did. But then I did absinthe as well, and I made an agave spirit from Grafrenet, and various liqueurs like limoncello, and I made a lime and an orange version of the same idea. So I started making a whole basket of different spirits, and they started coming onto the market around 2008. And it was the right time because famous brands like Hendrix and Bombay Sapphire were kind of leading the charge of sort of new generation gins. And Bombay Sapphire even went to sort of put all their exotic botanicals on the side panels of the bottle. And you look at that and you think half those botanicals come from Africa, and then they go back to Europe and get made into gin, and then get shipped back to Africa again by big business. And you look at those botanicals, and then you think, but look around you at the peninsula and the Cape Fold Mountains, and they are host and home to the most incredible botanical aromas, sort of medicinal and aromatic in our Fynbos kingdom. So I thought, let's make gin actually more African. And so we started using different Fynbos types, and I even went so far as to find a juniper plantation in the Cape, in the Simondium area. So I was actually making my gins with locally produced berries as well, and not relying on imported commodity juniper berries. And it clearly worked. And in those days, we were the only craft gin on the market. And as I said earlier, Inverroche were pretty quick to follow. But now, if you go into the big bottle stores in Cape Town, you'll probably count 300 gin labels from the Cape alone, never mind the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So it was really the foundation of a whole industry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm kind of pleased and proud of that we were able to sort of shine a light into the future and provide a path for all these other aspirant distillers and winemakers to turn to distilling. And but it's it's a labor of love as much as anything. You can make a good business out of it, but you need to have special skills, Holger. You for a start, you've got to understand the science and processes of distilling in terms of sort of the microbiology and the chemistry and the physics of it. But if you apply pure science to distillation, you're going to get a very sort of bland, one-dimensional product. On the other hand, you can talk about the artistic input required to sort of make these products more interesting and more colorful. But if you apply pure art to distillation, you're not going to get a workable end product. So somewhere, science has to meet art to become craft. So, I think that South Africa's got great climate, particularly the Cape. It's got great everything, and it's got a population that really enjoys what goes over their palate in terms of food and wine and drink. Very discerning palate. So we were kind of preaching to a ready audience when we were launching truly South African handcrafted premium spirits, and it's an easy market to penetrate. I think it was, because the timing was right and the people were right. The people wanted something South African. There was always, all over Africa, there's always been that perception that if it's imported, it must be good. If it's local, it's not good enough to export. So that's absolutely not true. We make fantastic wines, beers, and spirits in South Africa, and it's the craft beer movement was sort of running a little bit ahead, but maybe hand in hand with the craft distilling movement, and also the move away from massive cooperative winemaking to individual estate and private labels and so on. The market was absolutely ready for it, and it's been proven to be true. It stood the test of time, and all sectors continue to grow.
Roger, from a distance, what attracted me to your brands was the finished product. So the packaging, the bottles, the branding, everything was different. And for the first time, maybe one had seen it in the brandy sector, but for the first time in the rest of the spirit category, somebody had packaged it nicely. How did you find that packaging or the bottles, and how did you come up with that branding?
Well, the first thing, Holger, is that being a bit of a sort of a maverick and a do-it-yourself kind of person, the last thing I wanted to do was to go to a sort of a design house and let them run with it. And the other thing I had to realize was that sadly, in those days, locally produced glass, although competently made, didn't really have the the flair of some of the imported glass. We've changed all that with Procera now by hand making our own bottles in Kenya. But in those days, you had to get away from what I call a stock bottle and find a manufacturer overseas who could produce something that was both sexy and affordable and not commonly seen on the South African market. So that's the first place to innovate. And then secondly, avoid the design house, because they're going to over-design the product and probably not understand you well enough, and the labeling will look like it's designed. So we literally, my family and I worked on a piece of scrap paper and put together imagery and lettering and ideas that were like clean and simple, but got direct to the point. And I think that's terribly important. An awful lot of spirituous products are way over designed in the hope that they're eye-catching enough that people will impulse buy them.
Yeah.
I like a product that when it's labeled and you put it on a shelf next to 30 other products, and you walk into the room and glance up at that shelf, which label strikes you? And it's the one that is bold, simple, minimalistic, and to the point. If it's over flowery and over designed, overly colourful, it turns into a bit of a dog's dinner. I mean, it can be clever and it can be nice and it can be apt, but I like to keep it simple and direct and to tell the story directly back to the product and through the product to me.
Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Roger, when did you start feeling, I guess everybody turned to you for advice in those days when they wanted to make or start distilling. When did, and you said earlier there was a conflict between being a producer and a consultant. When did the shift happen from a producer to becoming a consultant?
Well, Holger, a lot of people, you're right, a lot of people were approaching me for advice of all sorts. Everything from the sort of legality and compliance with local and national authorities and the liquor board and SARS and DTI, right through to teaching people how to distill and answer their questions, and eventually designing products for them or with them, or helping them learn how to design their own products. And that, to me, became incredibly interesting, because it was like every project and every client was like a breath of fresh air. You could feel their passion and enthusiasm, and they just needed to connect the dots and have someone to hold their hand to do that. And you can compare that with, once you've got your own brand on the market and you've done the fun bit of choosing your botanicals and designing your label and getting the product the way you want it, thereafter you have to repeat that process ad infinitum to keep the product consistent, and it becomes a repeated process, which after a while, although you might make business out of it, it's no longer stimulating the imagination and creativity. It's become a repetitive process. I guess that's necessary. But I was finding so much joy in helping people to succeed. And I mean, I don't know if you follow the Michelangelo Awards in South Africa. For the last 5 years in a row, my clients or my products have won the gin trophy. And that's not for no reason.
Yeah.
That's because I pick who I work with. I want to feel their passion. I want to see that they've got the capability to follow through and to make their dreams come true. And then I can help them do that. And it started way back with De Aria Wine Estate and Stellenbosch. They were the first of in the early days of my consulting, they were the first to sweep the platinum and gin trophy at Michelangelo. And Autograph in Stellenbosch also won the gin trophy. Entirely my product and my clients and my mentoring. El Gin from Elgin won it recently. Procera from Kenya, my baby, won it in 2018. And this year it was Select Beverage Company. All my clients all engaged me for a fee to help develop their products. And I can't tell you how much pleasure it gives me to see these people having wonderful products that are like internationally recognized. It's terribly important. And so it became like inspiring, and a lot more people, even internationally, were beating a path to my door to kind of learn what they needed to learn to follow in my footsteps. And now we've got Procera with the only gin, I think, ever to get 2 double golds in one competition. And in the IWSC in London, Procera got 96 out of 100. That's good stuff. And I've got other clients who don't care to enter many competitions, but their products are hugely successful. And I mean, how about Global Gin, the Elephant Dung Gin?
Yeah.
I designed that with the brand owners, and now they're exporting all over the place, and they're like a naughty story in the gin industry of how can you use poo in gin, but it's incredibly successful and entirely safe and sanitary. but it's interesting. It's got a story, and I do a few of those projects every year, and it beats sort of standing in the production line in a factory. So I have to do a bit of both, of course, because I'm in charge of production at Procera. But it's way more stimulating to take a fresh project and create a new product sort of 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that with age, I think you get to know yourself better and you understand what your strengths are, and that you could identify that. Roger, and when did you make the move, or when did you have to start choosing between South Africa and Kenya?
Well, the Kenyans approached me in late 2017, and so between then and now, well, in the early days, I was making 5 or 6 plane trips a year up to Nairobi to get the product sort of into shape. And I'd sold my farm in Wellington by then, and I was renting, which meant when I went to Kenya, I was sort of renting in Kenya, and I was renting in Stellenbosch in those days. It just didn't make sense, and I had to choose South Africa or Kenya eventually, because my South African clients were keeping me busy pretty much full time. But by then, the gin industry in South Africa, to say it was saturated is well, maybe partially true. I mean, it's still viable and successful, but there's very little room to move forwards now without being too wacky or esoteric. I mean, every botanical available in South Africa has been used in a gin in some way or another. But Procera, on the other hand, was a completely different animal. All African botanicals. Eventually, I had to choose. So it was like a new chapter in my life. My wife and I moved permanently to Kenya in 2020 in the middle of lockdown. We got a repatriation flight to Kenya, and I've been here ever since.
How did that Procera project start?
Well, it started with my partner here, a chap called Guy Brennan. He and his friends were sitting around a lunchtime table in Kenya saying to themselves, don't we love a gin and tonic on a hot day? And then someone else chipped in, well, let's make our own. And then there's a long, awkward silence when everybody realized that I hadn't got a clue how to make it. So they put out feelers in the spirits industry in America, England, and South Africa, because South Africa was making a lot of craft spirits. And 5 of the 6 people they approached said, we need to get hold of Roger. So Guy jumped on an aeroplane and came to visit me on the farm in Wellington, the same one where we met. And he dumped a handful of African Procera juniper berries in my lap and said, can you make gin with this? And I tasted and I did a little sample distillation. And I turned to him and I said, Guy, this is going to change the way the world looks at gin. And it has. And that was a huge challenge. There are lots of elements. One, it was a completely untried juniper berry in terms of international spirits. Nobody was doing anything with it locally. It's entirely sustainable because there are literally millions of Procera trees in the tropical highlands of Kenya. And the only things using them were the baboons who like the sweetness. And so literally thousands of tons of these berries were falling to the forest floor to be composted each year. And yet when you pick those, they're different to communists. I'm not going to say they're necessarily better, but they're different, and they're brighter, more floral, more citrusy. And that's, I think, because those berries have sunshine and sunlight in the tropics all year round, as opposed to the cold winters of Europe where the things have to hibernate. And the other thing is that because they grow right on our doorstep, we can use them fresh. So we're one of very few gins in the world with access to actually fresh juniper berries that have never dried, never fumigated, never irradiated, and so on. So we can use not only different juniper berries, but use them in a different way. And the results speak for themselves, and the success of the product. So that was wonderful to be able to take that as a sort of the core quality ingredient of a completely new and different gin. That was real inspiration, and we've got to the stage now where we've got a sidebar project which we call the Procera Principle. And the Procera Principle is really providing a conduit to give other distillers, particularly in Africa, access to African juniper berries, with the idea that although everybody's using imported communists in South Africa, Procera is African, and why wouldn't African gins use an African juniper if they had access to it? So the Procera Principle is to provide a conduit where we're picking many tons of these berries and making them available to other producers. There's even a possibility of tempting a big producer like Beefeater to have an African expression using a different juniper berry. And in Kenya, I mean, it's if you ask anybody overseas about Kenya what they think it stands for, they'll tell you it stands for coffee, for tea, for top class athletes, for safaris and game drives, for the tribes like the Maasai and so on, for cut flowers and vegetables. But where is there a brand that actually identifies Kenya? Now, if you go to London, you go into the cocktail bars, and you go to Boston or New York into hotels and restaurants, and you mention the word Kenya, they go, Procera gin. And that is something that we are really pleased about and proud of, that we can actually have an entirely African spirit standing head and shoulders above many other gins on the world stage.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I know, it's incredible.
How long has it taken you to bring this to market?
Well, the route to market is often tortuous and sometimes simple. When we started this, we had to have a whole concept. Obviously, it evolved as time went by, but the concept was to keep it as African as possible. And that's how we got to having a handmade bottle here in Nairobi by a wonderful company called Kitengela Hot Glass, and they literally hand make the bottle. And we hand pick the juniper berries on our doorstep. and so on, to whack that all into shape from concept in late 2017 to first product on the market was about 18 months.
Okay.
But, the brand initial founders and brand owners, apart from me, knew nothing about making gin and recipes and so on. So when Guy left me in Wellington and came back to sort of play on his still in Nairobi, he had a go at making the recipe I provided for him and called me up and said, "This doesn't work." So I jumped on a plane, and his not very smart first batch of Procera, it tasted awful because he didn't know how to make the cuts and do the tails and blending and so on. So I put the recipe back together again and distilled, and that was batch number 2.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "That's great, but what about a bit more citrus? What about a bit more juniper? What about a bit more Madagascan pepper?" and so on and so on. So we went through multiple changes until we got to batch number 22. And he said, "That's it. That's what I want." And so I looked at my notes and I looked at back through 22 batches, and the number 22 was absolutely identical in every respect to batch number 2, the one that I'd made for him. Yeah. But it was a learning process for him, and I'm not a gin consultant because I don't know how to make gin. Show me a character of these new juniper and new spices and so on, and I'll rise to that and I'll interpret them very quickly to put a recipe together. The first Procera Blue Dot was launched late in 2018.
Okay.
We've got other advantages though, which point to the quality of the gin. There are 4 main ones. I've mentioned 2. The first 2 are that we're using a different juniper grown in the tropics at altitude, and then secondly we're using it fresh, never dried. And thirdly is we have the immense privilege to work on a Muller pot still. Muller pot stills are without doubt head and shoulders the best distilling machines for gins, rums, agave spirits, and so on. They are fantastic. They're so manageable and so distiller friendly, so controllable, infinitely controllable, and they have a column which doesn't use bubble plates or packing. It's got welded inside the column. There's a continuous copper spiral plate welded into the column, much like an Archimedes screw, and the uprising vapors have got like 10 meters of copper to run over on this Archimedes screw thing till they get to the deflegmator or knockdown condenser on the top, which you can control infinitely. So you get a passage of heavier condensed liquids coming down, like the heavier oils, congeners, water, and so on, going downwards and being bathed in hot vapors coming up from the still, so that you get a continuous and absolutely seamless extraction of only the finest and lightest elements. And so that is a huge quality factor. It produces gins that are incredibly soft to the palate. Mm-hmm. For example, our Red Dot gin is 51% ABV, and you can sip it, you wouldn't even know. It's so smooth. And then the fourth element is that for the last goodness knows how long, I never put botanicals in the distilling pot. I don't, because a distillation run is like 6 to 8 hours at a time. And if you put plant material and subject it to heat, alcohol for 8 hours, the cellulose structure of it is going to break down to such an extent that you get like, at the end of it, you get like a mushy, sulfurous mass of degraded botanical material. And, that's what gives an awful lot of gins like a sort of a heaviness or a density or a sort of stewed or cooked element to them. So instead of putting botanicals in the pot for distillation, I don't use the vapor path or gin basket either, because it gives inconsistent results, and we need consistency. No, I select the botanicals and prepare them by grinding by hand fairly finely, and putting them in what's like an overgrown tea bag. You could call it we call it sort of the pillowcase technique. We turn a pillowcase into a giant tea bag and put the botanicals in there and soak them overnight, say 15 hours, in gently warmed alcohol and water. And only the elements from the botanicals, the lightest, brightest oils, are extracted, leaving the denser, heavier congeners behind. And then in the morning, we drain and rinse that tea bag and start distilling. And what we've done is we've avoided botanicals in the pot, so we're not getting stewed, cooked elements in there. And we've only extracted the lightest and brightest elements, particularly from the juniper, but also from the other botanicals. And that gives a gin that is like light, bright, seamless, but incredibly smooth and incredibly complex. And the other thing I have to say about preparing a gin recipe or distilling a gin is that it must be juniper forward, maybe supported by citrus in any form you like. So it's got to be juniper citrus forward or just juniper forward. And if you can discern any other botanical in the flavor profile, in the palate, then I think you've failed to make a gin. If I have distilled a gin and I've used rose petals and you can taste the rose petals or smell them, then it's a rose petal spirit, not a gin. Same goes for Feinboss, same goes for other of the sort of strong botanicals, particularly the warm spices like vanilla, clove, cinnamon. If you can taste any of that in the gin, then it's not a gin anymore. And a lot of people in their sort of ardor, their desire to sort of get on the gin scene, kind of forget that. And they can call it gin because there's juniper berries in there. But if you can taste cinnamon or licorice or anything else, then I think the recipe must be declared a failure or not a true gin. So I'm very, very careful about that. I don't want, I think you can better describe those products as a flavored vodka, a vodka flavored with juniper and cinnamon, for example. But it's not truly a gin. Okay. And so, that kind of narrows your scope for producing a quality gin, and at the same time makes the job much harder, because you do want the interest and the complexity, but you don't want any other botanical to dominate.
Roger, and what projects are you working? How much time does Procera take up? Do you still have time for other projects?
I'm kind of contracted to. I'm a shareholder, of course. Okay. So that's my primary concern. Yeah. And I do get approached from people all over the world, particularly in Africa, but also other countries, to help work with them on a gin project, and I respectfully decline. Okay. But having said that, we are partnering with other people who are investing in, but don't know much about, gin production in Mauritius, Tanzania, Uganda, Congo, and as I said earlier, I've got a small side project in Nigeria. So I can work with those because I will also be a shareholder, and the Procera founders will also be shareholders. And what we as a team do, Guy and his expertise, provide the sort of business and marketing models, and I provide the recipes, the product, and staff mentoring, training to get each distillery up and running independently. So that I have interests there that I can work with and am working with. The first Tanzanian recipe will be coming off the still next week, Friday. Okay.
You said earlier that you are making some videos about, I saw the video about the bottle, and you said you're doing some other stuff. What was that again?
Yes, we're fortunate to have access to a brilliant French videographer who's a resident of Nairobi and become a friend. And he is documenting on film just about everything we do. I can find it and share a link, but he's done a fabulous video of us on the trail of exotic botanicals in Zanzibar and the island of Pemba, for example. Beautiful, moody, glorious shots. And then we've just done a whole series of harvesting the Procera berries in the Kajabi forest outside Nairobi. He's just done that now. But I can share a few of the still photos with you, and you'll see how sort of intense and moody it is. And then we're doing a video on the actual production processes, which covers my view of sort of the quality inputs to Procera, local juniper, using it fresh, the Muller still, and the pillowcase technique. We're happy to share all of that, but nobody can actually copy it, because to put it all together, I mean, we put it this way: we don't mind sharing the love in that sense, to encourage people to make better gin, but nobody will be fool enough to literally sort of copy.
Yeah. But I like that sort of storytelling. I think it just gives your brand so much more equity.
Well, it does give it actually a Holger, particularly in the sense that, in Cape Town, for example, there's a distillery on every street corner now, like there was a while ago, a craft brewery, for example. They can't all have an authentic story if they're working out of a small warehouse or garage set up in suburbia or in a little industrial area. You got to work really hard on an authentic story. We can, hand on heart, say that every single element that goes into Procera is there for a reason, and a sustainable reason, and an authentic reason. It's absolutely core. And this plays very much into the way we see the world spirits market developing. If you don't have a sustainability element, if you don't have a true story, sooner or later people are going to make the observation, and they're going to want to go with something that does have a proper backstory. And we want to document that so that we're completely ready.
Yeah. Roger, thank you for sharing that. I think it's wonderful to hear that, to catch up with you and just hear the passion and the long journey that you've had to get to this point, and it's really inspirational. Roger, how are the sales? You have exported to South Africa. I have seen it in South Africa. What has the response been?
The response is good, particularly given the kind of vicious alcohol lockdown bans in South Africa. Our chief outlet was to be Yuppie Chef, and a couple of things happened there. One, they had to take alcohol brands off their website, and then secondly, they've just recently moved warehousing, and so have to reapply for all their bond stores and licensed premises and so on. But it's gone well. But our main markets are the USA, UK, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, Germany.
Yeah. Where the strong currencies are.
Yeah, where the strong currencies are, definitely. And the other thing is we're producing in what's called an export production zone here in Kenya, an EPZ. And that's primarily set up to give excise duty, VAT, import duty and tax breaks to people producing in the export production zone, to create foreign currency for Kenya and to create employment. And we get amazing tax breaks. There's a moratorium on profits for 8 years, for example. No tax on profits, no VAT, no excise duty. And we're allowed to sell only 20% of our production in the Kenyan market, which we're doing. and that's going extremely well. But without doubt, our lead markets are Europe and the USA. In London, for example, in the best cocktail bars, you'll find a Procera martini or cocktail on the list, like 22 English pounds a pop. You know, you can buy a decent bottle of gin in London for £13.
Yeah. And did your team have to travel to these places, or did they seek you out?
A bit of both. Once we were getting like double golds in San Francisco and 96 points in London, people do. I mean, particularly cocktail bars, hotels, restaurants that want something different, something with a really good story, but it's backed up by quality.
Yeah.
So those people find us out, but otherwise, Holger, it's hard work. And Guy Brennan, co-founder, he's actually the CEO of the company as well. He's on the road 7 out of 12 months of the year.
Okay.
Literally doing the hard yards down the pavement to the venues, and engaging people and showing them product. He just got back from a dedicated trip to Boston, Massachusetts, and he had 9 calls there, and 8 became clients. Mm-hmm. So, you can't do that sitting on your ass in Nairobi or Cape Town or Durban or wherever.
No, we've learned that, hey?
No, I mean, you can have your dream, you can have your product, and you can do all the fun things. Everything up to the point of selling is fun. Okay, it's more fun if you've got a really good product and a really good story, and you know how to talk to people. That's great. But an awful lot of producers start with an idea of a product and haven't got any clue at all about how to actually get it into the market, other than sort of going to a local bottle store or going to a local gin or spirit show of some sort, setting up a table and persuading people to come and taste. Yes, you can do that, of course, and you've got to engage your local market that way. But how do you get into an overseas market? What about the logistics and the pricing, and who's actually going to handle it for you once you've got the account at Claridge's Hotel, for example? Who actually manages that account? So what we've done is we have what we call our strategic shareholder cohort, and we have handpicked and selected appropriate people in all these markets and invited them to become shareholders. Mm-hmm. So we've got a chap in London, we've got several in the USA, we've got in Sydney, Australia, we've got in Hong Kong, we've got in Singapore, we've got in Germany, and so on. People who are cash paid up shareholders in the company, and it's in their vested interest to look after the brand's interests in their respective markets. So that's been a very clever way in which we are assured of like 24/7 oversight of our product in the marketplace. Yeah. And then Guy goes to support them on a rotational basis, picking up new accounts and revisiting old accounts to make sure they're entirely happy, and so on and so on. Now, it's a big job. Yeah. It's if producing it and selling it can be divided into percentage effort areas, then 80% of it is selling it and 20% is maintaining your quality and having the right product. Yeah.
And those lessons, I think a lot of producers still need to learn. Roger, thank you very much for your time. Where's the best place to follow you?
Me personally, I have I have an Instagram account. I'll send you the link onto your WhatsApp, and I have a Facebook page. Otherwise, you'll find me on popping up on the Procera media. We've got full-time media people now in New York, London, and Kenya. Okay. It's Procera Gin.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
But we'd like those links for the videos that you produce, and it'll be nice to share those.
Yeah, of course. Only too happy to do that.
Thank you for listening to our stories here online. In the show notes, you will also find a link where you can subscribe to become part of our community and be notified when we upload our latest content.